Joining us now, MSNBC White House reporter Laura Barron Lopez, chair of the Advancing American Freedom Board, and former Trump White House Legislative Affairs Director Mark Short. Good to have you, sir. MSNBC columnist and contributor Philip Thump, and senior writer at The Dispatch and MSNBC contributor, once again, David Drucker. All right, Laura, H-1B visas. Is the White House concerned?
Look, I think the White House is definitely concerned because I was just talking to a former Trump advisor who regularly talks to White House staff still, and that advisor told me that staff is not happy about those comments that the president made during that Laura Ingraham interview, specifically because they feel like they were just trying to get him onto an affordability message, onto more of that America First message that you're talking about. And then he went and said this about American workers, saying that no, America doesn't necessarily have, quote, certain talent. And this former advisor that I was speaking to said that cavalier approach, that's the word that they used, the fact that he was, quote, dismissing Americans, that's the problematic part for the president. And it's something that they feel that he needs to essentially stop saying. I mean, right now, they think that obviously this created a lot of backlash, and MAGA base and a number of Republicans across D.C. that I've talked to were not happy about this interview. They were frankly pissed off. But they said that they think that as long as the president sticks to his initial H-1B visa plan, which was to, add this $100,000 check to it and essentially say that he was going to restrict the number of high-skilled workers coming in, they think that if he sticks to that policy, then eventually this could potentially blow over.
Yeah, there was one social media post that I saw, Mark, that said, we trained a bunch of housewives in World War II to drill together airplanes. You're telling me we can't train people to work in tech or engineering? They were upset that Donald Trump would say this country doesn't have a smart enough, base of people to do it. But tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that this is not a big issue.
I don't think that the president's going to lose his support over immigration issues. I think that support is pretty well locked in. I think that the president has an adept ability to change positions quickly, and often he beta tests lines that he sees don't work, and he reverts back to his original position. Katie, you've covered him long enough. You'll recall multiple instances where this has happened on other areas, and maybe they're not perfect, analogies, but, certainly as you might recall after one of the tragedies in the first administration of a school shooting, he hosted a large group of senators in the cabinet room and called for gun bans. And, he quickly received what that response was from his base and reverted back to his original position. And I think that his base is going to give him a lot of latitude on issues when it comes to immigration, particularly when they see the border secure in ways that it was not in the previous administration. So, yeah, do I think this is an unforced error by him? It is. But do I think that it's something that he's going to lose his base over? No. I think you'll see him probably pivot back to original messaging on H-1B visas before too long.
David, we were just talking about another form of this conversation with the anti-Semitism stuff. But I wonder what you're seeing out there from your reporting. Do you think Mark's right? Do you think the base is not going anywhere, no matter what Donald Trump says?
Well, I mean, you never want to say never because eventually you're wrong. But I think Donald Trump continues to have a really unique, strong connection and relationship with his voting base, more so than other politicians I've seen. I think what this episode does tell us, though, is that his successor at the top of the ticket in 2028 for the Republican Party is going to have a much tougher time keeping the Trump coalition together and may not be able to do it. Donald Trump has always been just establishment enough for old guard Republicans and just anti-establishment enough for the populist right that doesn't vote in every election but has been reliably showing up whenever Donald Trump is on the ballot. I think we should also point out here that Donald Trump really fumbled the answer, which he doesn't, really do that often when talking about immigration. All he had to say was that, of course, we have a lot of American talent, but one of the things that has made us one of the greatest countries in the world and given us a competitive global edge that no other country has is we not only have our talent, we attract talent from around the world. They help us develop medical devices and technology and all the sorts of things that end up enriching the American economy and the American worker. So we're going to train up our talent and we're going to, scoop up talent from around the world, and nobody's going to be able to match us. Of course, that's not what he said.
Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I think David's exactly right. You should never bet against Donald Trump being able to lock down his base, right? It's been 10 years now since he's been the preeminent voice in Republican politics, and that is held true. I do think, though, that it's important to remember that every day that passes is one day closer to Donald Trump not being president anymore, and that there are a lot of people who are going to be jockeying for the attention of his base to potentially be the replacement or to carve off a slice of that power and attention for themselves. And so every day that passes, we see more and more of these sorts of fissures. And yes, he may be able to seal some of these fissures back up, but eventually there's going to be someone or something that emerges that he's not able to repair that ultimately that power and that attention are going to go somewhere else, and everyone is going to start making inroads. It's happening even as we speak.
Yeah, but I mean, there are a lot of there's a lot of discontent out there, and it's not just the stuff that you're seeing online, Mark. And I'll push back. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been becoming very quickly a big thorn in the president's side. She responded to him earlier this morning, saying he said that she had lost her way, and she says she's always been for the American people. NBC News is reporting that she's now questioning if Donald Trump is still the America First president. So I'll bring you back to the question I had at the beginning. So if the Tea Party became MAGA, and MAGA, is MAGA still MAGA, or is MAGA becoming America First? And if so, is Donald Trump still that guy? Do you really think it's easy for him to brush these sorts of comments off?
No, I don't, Katie. To be clear, I didn't say he would never lose his base. What I said is I don't think he's in jeopardy of losing his base over this issue with immigration. And if we think that, he never does that on immigration issues, in the first administration, you might recall, he said, I think we should have a pathway to citizenship for DACA. And he wanted to offer that in exchange for border wall funding. And so he does do this, and he gets singed, and then, he responds. And he has an amazing ability to pivot and switch his positions and pretend he never had the other position. And so I don't think that his base is in risk of losing him, even if Marjorie Taylor Greene is out pushing for extension of Obamacare subsidies and Trump's not, or other areas that Marjorie Taylor Greene is pushing. I don't think that's at risk. I do think that obviously what we've seen, though, is that the party has abandoned its principles for traditional conservatism entirely. And now you have us basically advocating for massive protectionism, price controls on drug imports, state-owned enterprises, and things that are antithetical to conservatives or anybody who believes in free markets. And so, yeah, you might see people, break away from him at the moment, but I think that he'll pivot on some of the issues that are core to him, like immigration, and then he'll pivot back when he feels like the base is responding to a line that he's beta testing. Well,
there's an interesting overlap here, David, with what we were talking about a moment ago with the anti-Semitism stuff, because this idea of America First is being very wholly embraced by the Tucker Carlsons and the Nick Fuenteses on the right, but their version of it is even more extreme. It's white and Christian first. It's no immigrants. It's going back to a more familiar, in their terms, view of this country as something that is better off without immigration, without diversity.
Yeah, well, I mean, America First itself was a slogan that had been banished because that's what it originally meant, and until Donald Trump revived it and refashioned it, nobody used it for decades. I mean, look, this is I think a part of the debate that the country has from time to time, and I don't mean anti-Semitism and racism versus not. I just mean that there are always wings of the political parties that are pushing for either policies that are extreme or policies that are not acceptable, and that's where the political parties can be very useful because they can moderate and they can excise the extremes in their midst. It's just a matter of whether or not they're going to do it.
Yeah, I've got some Pam Bondi news I'm going to get to in one second, but just one more to you, Phil. There's this bumping of heads. There's this fight within the Republican Party for what it's going to be. Maybe Donald Trump is Donald Trump for the next 3 years. But what it's going to be after Donald Trump, what it looks like. Is it the Tucker Carlson party, or does it go to back to, I don't know, some other form of normie Republican? Sure. Does it become this white nationalist party that believes that immigration wholeheartedly is bad and that this country should be Christian and Christian first and foremost?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge that the party has fundamentally is that Donald Trump has successfully shifted the political right in this country to essentially an attention-based economy. And the things that seize the most attention, the reason that we know who Nick Fuentes is, that you can just mention him and assume people know who he is he's very good at getting attention, right? And he does that by being provocative. He does that by saying things that are beyond the pale and that are outside the norms of what we would accept. But he gets a base because of that. And because of that shift toward this attention-seeking, that's the locus of power. That is what's being fought over. And so you're not going to win that. You know, God bless Mark Short, but you're not going to win that by saying, but what we need to do is move back to free trade. That's not the sort of thing that compels that the people who see that attention. Exactly. And so that's what the fight is going to be, unless there's a total revamp of what it means to be on the political right.
Back in April, with much fanfare on so-called Liberation Day, Donald Trump unilaterally imposed hundreds of billions of dollars of taxes on the American people by slapping tariffs on the goods that we all buy. And he brags about it all the time, lying that other countries pay the tariffs, not Americans, certainly not the American consumer. Then last week, Republicans got their clocks cleaned in elections across the country, in large part because people are finally saying, wait a minute, prices haven't come down. In fact, they've gone up. So the Trump administration is desperately searching around for a solution to their political problem, and they found one that is a truly brilliant idea. How about we remove some of the tariffs on goods people buy that are driving prices up? Now, if only they could find the clown that imposed those tariffs in the first place. Congressman Brendan Boyles, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, representing North Philadelphia, and he joins me now. Congressman, I really did have to chuckle today when I saw today's announcement after they so strenuously told us that tariffs don't jack up prices, that they're going to now be giving tariff relief for grocery items like bananas and coffee and other things that clearly have gone up in price and clearly been affected by the tariffs.
The brilliance will take your breath away. Congratulations, President Trump, for putting out part of the fire that you yourself started about 6 months ago. But already damage has been done to our economy. The average household in the United States will pay more than $1,800 more than they otherwise would have paid for household goods from last spring up until this upcoming spring. That is a massive tax increase when we think of it, about an extra $150 a month. And then in terms of what it's done to our GDP, it has shaved off a significant percentage, about 0.5%. So the reality is that the interest rates that, of course, we pay on our mortgages, student loans, auto loans, et cetera, they would already be lower because the Fed would have been able to lower rates at a faster rate this year, if not for the inflation resurgence that this president caused through his nonsensical tariff policy.
The reporting is indicating that this vote on the Epstein files is likely to happen on Tuesday. What are you anticipating in terms of how Republican House leadership plays this? How much the White House goes to bat to whip on this vote?
Yeah, so I've also been told by some Republican colleagues that they have been told by their leadership that it will be Tuesday. I expect this vote to pass. I mean, the White House did absolutely everything it possibly could to prevent the discharge petition from getting the necessary 218 signatures. Remarkably, Mike Johnson kept us out of session for almost 2 months in order to delay getting the 218 signatures. But now that has happened, we will have the vote on Tuesday, and I expect it will pass by a large bipartisan majority. But here's the thing. Don't take false comfort from that, because there is, I think it's rather unclear whether or not this bill will get a vote in the Senate. If it does and it passes there, then we actually need President Trump to sign it. What are the odds that this president will actually sign something that he has been so strongly fighting against for months and months? I do fear that even if this were to pass the House, even if it were to pass the Senate, the president would veto it, and he would have enough Republicans who would vote to sustain that veto.
Do you think there will be? It does seem to me, I mean, obviously, the Senate doesn't want to take it up, but it does seem to me that the margins matter on this Tuesday vote, and that might be part of the reason they whip it, which is that, you know, if you got 300 yeses or 350, I mean, if it's a huge margin, it might be tough for the Senate, right? Doesn't it put some pressure on them?
Yeah, that's a good point. It would. I will say, though, for the House Republicans who have been probably telling the White House one thing and publicly telling the MAGA base something else. It's easier to duck putting your signature on a discharge petition than it is to actually duck a public vote and a recorded vote in the House of Representatives. So I do think this is going to be a fairly large majority on Tuesday.
You mentioned the Senate. I want to ask you about this provision that was inserted the last minute into the continuing resolution to keep the government open. We're going to do a little bit more on it ahead, but since I have you here, it seems like across the ideological spectrum, people in the House are apoplectic. It basically allows 8 senators who had their records looked at perfectly lawfully the way that any citizen might have them looked at in a criminal investigation, totally above board and by the book, could sue for $500,000, maybe as much as $1 million, and they could sue the Department of Justice. So Trump could just order the Department of Justice to settle with them. How furious are the members in your chamber about this?
It's legalized bribery, and by the way, it's a $1 million minimum because it's a very long story, but essentially the way it's drafted, each one of those 8 Republican senators would qualify twice, meaning it would be a minimum of $1 million payday. It's very likely unconstitutional. It's likely against Senate rules. And by the way, this would only apply to members of the United States Senate. No other group, no other protected class. Now suddenly U.S. senators are a protected class. What it also shows you is each one of those 8 Republican senators who voted for this bill probably violated Senate ethics rules, because there is a provision in the Senate rules, the same way there is in the House, the same way there is in almost every state legislature, that you can't vote for a bill that will uniquely enrich you as a standalone, not as a larger group or entity. That's clearly what they did. They just voted for something in which they are one of only 8 people out of 340 million in the United States who will get $1 million.
Congressman Brendan Boyle. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's going to be a vote next week, I think, to strip it out. We played that Mike Johnson sound. Of course, same issue there, right? It's got to go back to the Senate. We'll see what happens there. Congressman Brendan Boyle, thank you so much.
The top story is one Donald Trump can't escape as he caps the worst start to a month of his second term. From the Dem wins to the Epstein email explosion this week, he is having a tough November. These new Epstein emails have upended the White House, and they're only getting worse because it takes time, even in our rapid information environment, for journalists and politicos and any citizen who wants to look and go through these 20,000 emails. All of this started when Democrats used their power to push the envelope and release some of the emails, the ones they said showed why Trump is hiding, as they demand a vote to release them all. Republicans got mad, remember, in the week and said, oh, well, we'll release more. And so what started with 3 emails turned to 20,000. Tonight I have more details on how it's all going, because this is a vast tranche of documents, of emails, that many people clearly, from the way they were typing to Epstein, thought would stay secret forever. Epstein made the biggest news, perhaps, from the grave, so to speak, with his now unearthed statement to Maxwell, a sex trafficker convicted and in prison right now, that, of course, Trump knew about the girls. Donald Trump has denied any wrongdoing and has very specifically tried to deny that he knew what Epstein was exactly up to, although the Trump story on that has changed, and that is getting new scrutiny right now. There is also how the Trump DOJ has dealt with Maxwell and her controversial interview with a former Trump defense lawyer who now is paid by your tax dollars to do the people's business at the Trump DOJ. But it looks like Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche may not have been doing the people's business. We'll get to that. But in this exchange from 2011, Epstein wrote to Maxwell Trump was spending, quote, hours at his house with one of the victims. Maxwell said she's been thinking about that, as they said that Trump was a dog that didn't bark. That matters for many reasons, but specifically whether Deputy Attorney General Blanche is worried about later professional sanctions or misconduct or even potentially being disbarred if this is part of a larger cover-up. It obviously contradicts what Maxwell apparently falsely claimed, with no repercussions yet, when she had her cozy interview with Deputy Attorney General Blanche just months ago.
I think they were friendly, like people are in social settings. I don't think they were close friends, or I certainly never witnessed the president in any of, I don't recall ever seeing him in his house, for instance.
Something she suddenly says she didn't recall when the emails say she did. If the Trump DOJ were on the level, and this is now public, at a minimum, they would go deal with this with her. At a maximum, remember, even when you're in prison, if you mislead the federal government, if you provide false statements to a federal officer, that could be a new crime. And yet they're not obviously doing anything like that. They're giving her special treatment and a puppy in prison, and we'll get to that. Blanche says that for some reason, quote, law enforcement didn't have those emails when he did the interview. As I've reported to you, he said, when I interviewed Maxwell, quote, law enforcement didn't have the materials Epstein's estate, quote, hid for years and only provided to Congress. That statement is highly suspicious, and it is now getting debunked by the Epstein estate, which says we hadn't received any requests from DOJ in recent years, emphasis on recent years, I'll come back to that, but they say, and these are the ones who have been lately more transparent, of course, working for the Epstein estate sounds controversial, but Epstein's dead. These are the people who manage the estate. These are lawyers who have their own obligations. They are the ones who provided these emails. So they might have more credibility than Mr. Blanche right now. And they say tonight it's inaccurate for Blanche and Trump DOJ to assert the estate has hidden anything. And let me tell you a bit more about that. You might say, okay, Ari, with everything going on, why are we diving into a debate between anonymous lawyers or random obscure lawyers at the Epstein estate and the Deputy Attorney General? Well, the Deputy Attorney General is responding because he's under pressure. The interview, many legal experts have said, looked suspicious at the time. Now it looks like outright cover-up, potential misconduct. And so he says law enforcement didn't have the materials. He tries to go after the Epstein estate. Maybe he didn't realize they would come back at him. They're saying his whole defense that they hid anything is wrong, is inaccurate. Another word for that would be a lie if they think he knows that it's inaccurate. But more to the point, they didn't use the underlying original nonpartisan career prosecutors who led the Maxwell case. That was suspicious. I pointed that out at the time. Those prosecutors probably know everything that they requested, including the first step you take in this kind of probe, which is to try to get emails and texts, and you go to the telecommunications providers. You don't even need to get them from Epstein. We would know more about that if the Trump DOJ was on the level. And then remember, on top of that, they then fired the person who actually won Maxwell's conviction, Maureen Comey. So there's a lot more smoke here and a lot more questions, and a real investigation can get to the bottom of it. Now, you might say, are we going to get to the bottom of anything? Seems like a lot of secrecy and a lot of corruption these days. Well, you're right if you think that. And there are a lot of places where Congress doesn't do anything, and a lot of places where Republicans won't stand up to Donald Trump. That is a well-known pattern. And yet here we are ending this bruising week for Trump with an unusual headline. Republicans revolting. Congress, which is controlled by Republicans, will actually hold this vote next week on releasing more of the Epstein files. Epstein accusers imploring lawmakers to vote yes. That's part of the public pressure. They write, there's no hiding behind party affiliation. When you vote, we will remember your decision at the ballot box. And there has certainly been a nonpartisan or transpartisan movement with growing heat to get to the bottom of this. Trump is trying to deflect. He made an announcement today that itself is illicit and suspicious. He now says he wants the DOJ to investigate whether there were other crimes or Epstein's relationship with Bill Clinton and other figures, and he names the bank, J.P. Morgan, tech entrepreneur Reid Hoffman, and others. Now just think about that. I know we live in cynical times, but if this government, from the president on down, thinks there was sex trafficking with any of those people, or J.P. Morgan, which of course was very controversial in how it handled Epstein's banking, just think about what Trump just admitted, that they haven't really pursued that. This is his DOJ. He was in charge in the first term. They could have looked at all of that. That's when the initial Epstein case came. He's been in charge now, as you know, for this year. And yet, that announcement, if you take it at its word, admits they haven't done it, and there may be crimes, and now they want to do it. That implicates Donald Trump, if you take him at his word. If you don't take him at his word, and you think this is a giant distraction, an effort to use the the real crimes and victims and sex trafficking that did occur in a politicized way to go after other people and distract from himself, well, that's even more disgusting and cynical. And if you know this program, I don't use those words often or lightly, but it is indeed disgusting. If you have an oath to uphold the Constitution and enforce the laws, and here you are abusing and misusing that responsibility to play political games, and your pawns or chess pieces in that are the women and girls who actually were the victims of these crimes, we do need to maintain our capacity both for outrage when it's warranted and a vigorous search for the truth, which is what the justice system is supposed to do. This is how it goes when Trump talks to reporters about this.
Mr. President, can you respond to these Epstein emails that were released today?
President Trump walked past reporters yesterday, as you see here, as they were asking him questions about the newly released Epstein emails.
Mr. President, any comment on these Epstein emails, sir?
Now, not a lot of response from a normally voluble figure there. The conservative Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, says, as is so often the case, Trump has been his own worst enemy here. He looks like he has something to hide, even if he doesn't. Now, let me tell you a word about that even if. Even if he doesn't have something to hide is charitable. But he does have something to hide. He's in the Epstein files. He's in Epstein's secret emails to a convicted sex trafficker, Maxwell, to Steve Bannon. People are getting more details on those as everyone pours through what is 20,000 documents. Some of them are quite interesting. Some of them are random. Some of them, the House release involves public information like pages from a book. So you go through all this in the reporting process. But he clearly has something to hide because he's been fighting even this disclosure, which shows he's in the files. And he's fighting the next possible disclosure, which suggests he's in the files again. As for Maxwell, she has the audacity or the sex trafficking chutzpah to use this period to prepare to ask Trump to let her out of prison. Something that would seem unthinkable unless you think, again, he would rather take the hit for that to maintain her as some sort of non-credible source to defend him. Unlike other prisoners, Maxwell already reportedly gets unlimited supplies, special treatment, quote, customized meals personally delivered to her cell, a private exercise area, access to this much maligned service puppy. She says it's safer and more comfortable. I feel like I've dropped through Alice in Wonderland Looking Glass. I'm much happier and safe, is her statement on the matter. Trump said he would not rule out freeing her. Think about that. He's on the run. He's in the files. And now, having campaigned on both transparency of releasing the files and justice and saying this whole pedophilia ring was a bad thing, he is now still leaving the door open to freeing from prison the only individual ever incarcerated for Epstein's related crimes. Now, we've heard so many lectures about how nothing changes and Trump has loyalty and he likes to tell people he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. Well, that may not be true either. There are some problems, legal and otherwise, that Trump's base has excused. But right now, I showed you the Wall Street Journal. I showed you the Republicans in the House who overrode Trump's strategy here of secrecy. And other members of the MAGA base are upset. Newsweek reports on the threat to the Trump presidency now looks unlike anything we've seen before. And over across the whole country, his approval is cratering, MAGA loyalists concerned.
Across the Republican Party, there are calls for more disclosure.
The government will not protect the predators.
There is just nobody in the electorate who is buying this.
Trump could one-up him and say, well, Johnson wants to have the vote Wednesday. I want to release the Epstein files Tuesday. And he could literally be a hero.
I think it's a huge miscalculation.
He's alienated a lot of his base with his statement that you're no longer my supporter and you never were if this is what you're for.
Imagine what's going to continue to happen when you learn even more damning information. Trump continues his spiral, his cynical announcements, which may not be playing very well, and then you actually might get a vote to release the files.
Joining us now is former federal prosecutor and senior writer for Politico magazine, Ankush Khardori, and MSNBC political analyst and opinion columnist at the New York Times, Michelle Goldberg.
Ankush, to parrot what Simone just said, you'd think, right? Like any person with basic logic would think that the DOJ would be interested in this. If the demand were legitimate, wouldn't they just have opened the investigation months ago?
Yes. I mean, at any point they could have reopened this investigation. Whether that's a good idea is a separate matter. But yeah, no, this coming when it does now, I mean, it just appears to be what it appears to be. The president trying to deflect from a burgeoning political scandal. It's an abuse of authority, a corruption of the Justice Department's integrity and mandate to be just blatantly used for partisan political purposes in order to shield the president from public and political scrutiny.
And Michelle, help me understand something here. So ever since the big Epstein dump of emails hit earlier this week, the president's out there saying, like, this whole thing is a hoax. Whole thing is a hoax. So, Michelle, if this whole thing is a hoax, why is the president calling on the Justice Department to look into President Clinton, J.P. Morgan, Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, and all these other people related to the Epstein files?
Look, obviously the president is not known for internal consistency. My worry about this, I mean, look, if the Justice Department wants to investigate Epstein's ties to J.P. Morgan and Chase and even, Lawrence Summers, have at it. They probably should have done that ages ago, although I suspect if there was anything there to be found, they would have jumped in it already. I wonder if the reason that the president wants this investigation open now is because there's going to be a vote next week that's likely to get significant Republican support to release the files. There will be a lot of pressure then for it to be taken up in the Senate, and it could end up on his desk. And so he gives him and maybe Republicans who want to stand with him at least a kind of thin pretext to say, well, we can't release these files when the investigation is open, which is, by the way, probably why the files weren't released during the Biden administration.
I mean, to Michelle's point, the Biden administration officials at the time and then afterwards have said that there was an open investigation during the administration. Ghislaine Maxwell had appealed to the Supreme Court. Her appeal had not yet been heard or taken up or anything. And so they weren't releasing anything. But I want to remind everyone at home that according to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, the emails in question right now, the Justice Department didn't have. According to Todd Blanche, the Epstein estate had these emails. According to the Epstein estate, allegedly, I'm just telling you what the Epstein estate said, y'all. The Epstein estate said the Justice Department never asked them for this. They don't have any recent requests from the Justice Department. The requests that they had were from the House Oversight Committee, and they complied with the requests that they had. And that's where we got these emails. Donald Trump wants to talk about Bill Clinton. Let's talk about Bill Clinton. Was he on the island? Well, Epstein emailed to Michael Wolff about Bill Clinton sent on January 2015. Email: Clinton was never, ever there. All right. Well, guess that closes that part of the investigation. Epstein email. I want to know about Donald Trump and Thanksgiving. How about that? Ankush, treat this up for you. There's some takeaways from new emails about Trump and his late friend Epstein. Epstein claimed he was spending Thanksgiving in 2017 with Trump. According to White House records, Trump spent Thanksgiving of 2017, his first as president, at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach. The White House did not disclose the guest list. Ankush, everybody but Donald Trump apparently needs to be investigated for the emails. Why is the president acting like he is implicated as a pedophile in these emails? No one's ever said the president was a pedophile. He is the only person acting guilty.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to say that there has not been evidence that he was engaged in or aware of criminal misconduct. I've said this before, I think even here. I was not a fan of the release all the files thing, because what happens is this: you get emails, you don't understand the context, you don't even know. I mean, we're talking about relying on the word of Jeffrey Epstein, who's writing some of these emails. Why would we assume?
Who is a monster.
Correct.
We should say Jeffrey Epstein is a monster. He is a child trafficker, a sex trafficker, a pedophile, and his crimes were real. But these emails were written, many of them, they go back to like early 2000s.
Well, this is the thing: is even if you accept that, you accept sort of my view of the situation, Trump is clearly acting like he has something to hide, or that he is hiding something on someone else's behalf. Now, I don't know if that's true, but all of this hemming and hawing all year, right, going back and forth on what's in the files, and we're talking about it. There's going to be this big, elaborate, release. Then they pare it all back, and there's nothing to see here now. And they told us the investigation's closed. We know that Epstein killed himself. There's nothing else to investigate. Now all of a sudden it's reopened, but it's focused only on Trump's political opposition. I mean, it's become a cliche, but it is true that if the message that Trump sent today that we all saw were delivered in private and we read about it, say, in the Washington Post or the New York Times, it would be an extraordinary political scandal.
I think he's doing it in public, Alicia.
He is doing it in public.
He's shielded.
He is doing it in public. He is doing with congressional Republicans, many aiding and abetting him. And what is interesting to me, Simone, is that their strategy has not worked. If anything, their strategy up to this point has backfired. Michelle, there was some great reporting by one of your colleagues in the New York Times, Michael Gold, about the way in which the House GOP has actually ended up feeding this scandal. It was Republican chairman of the oversight panel, James Comer's subpoena to the estate that led to the release in September of a sexually suggestive drawing and note that appeared to bear Trump's signature, a document from a book that was created for Mr. Epstein's 50th birthday, and that Trump has insisted he did not create, in their desire to say, let's not just focus on Trump. Let's cast this net as wide as we can and try to turn attention away from him. They have actually succeeded in receiving and making public documents that begin to beg more questions than I think they were prepared to answer.
Well, the Republican line on this has been Donald Trump handled the PR badly, right? That Donald Trump is it's unclear why he's behaving this way and why he doesn't just come clean. And so I'm not sure how many people actually believe that, but if you sort of proceed on those premises, then you get to a point where, yes, you are just, sort of subpoenaing all this material, thinking that it's going to throw, kind of cast doubts on all these other people, when really Donald Trump's name appears in these documents over and over and over again. And, and past the point where we knew that they had a relationship, then they had a falling out. I mean, what's so striking about these documents is it seems like Epstein has some sort of pull in the first Trump administration.
Right. And I just want to add into this conversation that so much of this, Simone, is about justice for the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's abuse. But there's also this underlying question that there has always been with this president about who has leverage over him, right? Whether that is a conversation about Russia, whether it's a conversation about these files. Yes, there is justice for those victims here. I think there are also some questions about national security and transparency.
I think questions about national security and transparency, justice for the victims, Jonathan. I would add in a third thing here. And this goes back to something that has been a theme, I think, of this entire Trump 2.0 presidency, which is the re-engineering of systems of our government, tools of our government, such as the Justice Department, to not serve the people, but the grievances or lack thereof of one man. And the president just what Ankush said about the fact that he directed Pam Bondi. This is now the second instance that we know of on his social media site that the President of the United States has directed the Attorney General of the United States of America, the people's attorney, not his personal attorney. He has personal attorneys and there's White House counsel. Pam Bondi is neither of those. To conduct an investigation, to look into something, to indict someone. And this is now the second time that we know of that she has complied.
Well, look, yes, Pam Bondi is the Attorney General of the United States. Todd Blanche is the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. He was the president's personal lawyer in the New York case. They are still acting as the president's personal lawyers. I mean, as we look at what's happening with the Justice Department, I think it would behoove all of us to just knock down that mental wall, because it'll help you understand what the president is actually doing. There is no separation between the executive branch, between the president and the Department of Justice and the Attorney General anymore. I don't know how much more evidence we need to have that that system, that norm is gone. And if you were still hanging on to that one scintilla of hope that there was some separation, take a look at the meeting that they had with Congresswoman Lauren Boebert in the Situation Room of the White House to strong-arm her into taking her name off the discharge petition. Now, of the three people sitting at this table, I am one who has never, probably, well, two of us probably have never been inside.
I've never been called to the Situation Room.
Inside the Situation Room. But that's the most secure place, probably one of the most secure places in the world, and certainly the most secure place in the White House. Yeah. No cell phones, no nothing. That's where you have your most sensitive conversations. So why was Lauren Boebert brought into the White House and had a meeting, not with the president, he wasn't there, but with the Attorney General of the United States and the head of the FBI? For what purpose?
These are questions that deserve to be answered. And Ankush, I will tell you, I was hoping to hear from the president this week because he has never met a camera he didn't like.
Wait, but
Simone,
Simone, I have some news on that because as you all were talking, our producers got in my ear and let me know that the president did, in fact, just gaggle on Air Force One. So,
well, please,
your wish is my command, Simone. This is a rough log. He says, I know nothing about that. They would have announced that a long time ago. What did he mean when he spent all the time with Bill Clinton, with the president of Harvard? You know, that is Summers, Larry Summers, whatever his name is, and all the other people that he spent time with. Jeffrey Epstein and I had a very bad relationship for many years, and this is the line I want to underscore for all of you. But he also saw strength because I was president. So he dictated a couple of memos to himself. Give me a break. Ankush, I have just a legal question here, which is, at what point does the president of the United States need to stop talking because he is actually legally complicating this for himself?
Well, look, this Justice Department is not, I mean, they're not going to investigate him. And he's made very clear that he does not want them looking at him. So ordinarily you would say, yes, if you are in the vicinity of serious criminal misconduct, even if you believe you have not yourself engaged in any criminal misconduct, you should probably keep your mouth closed, let your lawyer handle the interactions until the investigation is over. In this particular case, I think he's acting as if he knows what the reality is, which is this Justice Department is not going to investigate or prosecute him. You know, to the extent there is some notion, maybe that people have, that 2028, some opposition figure or a Democrat will come in and try to reopen this whole thing. I mean, we just went through 4 years of a whole bungled mess of a Democratic administration flummoxing presidential accountability. So I think the odds are pretty good for him that he does not have to worry about any criminal liability.